I think it's a very hot space right now. It's probably one of the fastest growing markets is DCIM, Data Center Infrastructure Management. You've got a lot of players out there, but I think it's very difficult to become that all-encompassing windshield, right? So more important than trying to be that, your technologies have to be able to integrate and communicate and operate with whatever's happening in your data center today. I mean, again, it goes back to measuring, understanding what you have, knowing where it is, understanding how it moves. You know, that knowledge is extremely important, and that's really what DCIM is all about. But there are just tons of different solutions. Some come at it from the environmental side, some come at it from the asset management side, some come at it from the power side, and some attempt to come at it from all sides. So it's pretty exciting right now in that space. A lot going on.
And I think the trickiest part in that space is not all of those systems talk to each other either.
That's
so, you
correct.
know, you take these systems to make you more efficient, then you've got 8 consoles to run them all, and then you're manually adjusting figures between one and the other. So
You've got
it's got a ways to go
right,
before we get to that
right.
full
Sure.
interoperability.
That will be the future, right? This is
Exactly.
where we're moving toward, is the interoperability.
Yep.
And the easy
So how far away from? are we?
Well, there are some.
1 year out there, 5 years?
There are some SNMP modern tools out there that will port out to like a central
they do.
dock.
But
Yeah, they do to
That's-
a certain case, and with a lot of customization. One of the other tools actually that we're seeing is modeling tools.
Yep.
To actually take,
CFD is
right,
huge.
take data, okay, and model, a use case.
Right.
If I add another row of blades, what happens to my mechanical and electrical? What's my
It's,
cooling? What's the impact?
Predictive analysis
Exactly.
is a big part
Big
of
part.
DCIM as well. You know, what happens when I make the changes? What does that picture look like? Back to the protocols, you know, you mentioned SNMP. Most modern systems are based on SNMP, but you get to legacy systems that are BACnet, and the facility systems are Modbus. So how do you get all this stuff to
The
talk
challenge
to
is you can have these systems talk together today, but what if you have a change in your process? If your company's business model changes somewhat, that's when the real challenge comes to play, to change all that and reprogram things. And right now, the costs are very, very high to make those changes. In the future, that's where the benefit of this DCIM is those changes will be much easier because the systems are now designed to make the changes quickly, right? To transpose data on the fly.
Exactly, and I think that's really where the shift is to get it to where everybody does talk to each other. So
That's right.
you can use that. You know,
Yeah,
CFD is
real-time.
one good thing, but you know, garbage in, garbage out. And
Yeah,
unless you really know where you are.
Real-time data to everybody
Yep.
who needs it.
Exactly.
That's correct.
I agree.
Other questions from the audience? Yes.
Say for an initial DCIM engagement, do you like to see a certain level of operational intelligence before you begin offering solutions, or do you find that kind of comes into play as you enter into the conversation?
The more intelligence that's there, the easier it is to migrate to a full DCIM solution. I mean, we walk into some facilities and, you know, they've got an old Visio drawing and outdated Excel. Actually, a lot of
You'd be
big
surprised when most
companies
of
are
them-
like that.
If you're lucky.
Yeah,
If you're lucky.
and they ask, you know, what's it going to take to migrate this into, you know, we're going to start from scratch, you know. So, but we have other customers that are more sophisticated. They've got robust databases. They may have had a DCIM system deployed, so it's just a matter of taking that data and putting it into a different database.
The reason why I ask is because most of the facilities that I and you and we all run across are lacking in operational intelligence, infrastructure intelligence,
Absolutely.
to a great degree. So I guess to add to my question, what do you think, standards, what have you, what do you think might begin to drive the need to have more operational intelligence? Because what's happening is when people are kind of given the choice between, okay, I need full availability or I need what have you. The bottom line is, in mission critical, the single word that governs why it exists is availability. But with inadequate operational intelligence, you're already challenging it. So what do you think are some of the drivers that the sector as a whole you think need to see happening to have operational intelligence become more a part of the conversation?
Compliance started that, right?
I think, I see it as cost. You know, again, back to the question of green, right? At the end of the day, that's often what motivates people, right? When they understand how much money they're losing, you know, or understand that their data center can now begin to generate revenue instead of sucking it right out of the organization, that becomes a pretty decent motivator. But you've got to get pretty high in the organization to really get them to understand and see the whole entire picture.
So do you think there needs to be like say for instance, the whole idea of MBTF or the cost of downtime? That's a tough metric to arrive at because of all the intangibles. Do you think that there might need to be a little focus on maybe establishing a standardized way of realizing a downtime metric?
Well, I think though, it really started, if you look at compliance, like anybody that had to deal with SOX, right? They all of a sudden had to go out and document everything that they had. So that's a start. Now you have enterprises that don't do that, that aren't publicly traded, that have never made that measure. So now it becomes catching somebody's eye, right? Somebody has to understand, and even if it ends up being at the CIO level, you have to be able to measure that to know where your efficiencies are. And IT people are now being required to say, well, if you really want that new server, because we don't have a standard 2 or 3 year refresh cycle anymore, we don't have a standard 5-year refresh cycle. If you want this new equipment, you have to give me the business case. And then you also have the thing, back to the old days where you don't realize you need a backup until you need a backup, right? So the whole availability thing, and making sure that somebody doesn't have primary and secondary power plugged into the same power strip. And it usually, in some cases, it's going to take a big mistake before that happens, but it's kind of moving that way, I think.
I don't think it needs a standard per se. I think what DCI implementation really needs is a business partnership. The vendors need to really understand the customer's business and how they run their business, so they can understand what's important to them, and then work on the metrics on a case-by-case basis.
And there's standard operating procedures for running a data center.
Exactly. And you'd be surprised how many companies don't have those.
Yeah.
Disaster recovery plan? What's that? That's when you go, oh no. And scramble.
Other questions from the audience? So shifting gears yet again, we heard a little earlier about cloud deployments. You can't go any place without hearing about big data and all the storage needs and all the storage requirements that are going into the data center. We heard about the network and obviously the importance of the network. So a lot of things, a lot of moving piece parts. How do you all think about it in terms of, once again, whether it be cooling, power, technology? So we think out the next 5 years, so I'm not going through a technology refresh every 3 months as I'm putting more analytics out there, more big data, moving to a hybrid cloud. What should companies be thinking about deploying now, and then thinking about them not over the 3-month cycle, but over the next couple of years, so you're not building out stuff they're going to write off pretty quickly? Thoughts on that?
You got to think about your business. There's, you could take finance, right? We got a guy up here in the finance sector. No two finance companies are the same. You got trading, you got banking, you got online banking, you've got branch bank facilities. It's a little bit different in each part of the business, but the trick is you have to align your business needs with IT, and IT needs to be a part of that business plan.
Yeah, totally agree. And again, you look at financial services. Budgets have just they've just been slammed in the past few years. So you need to be efficient. You need to think efficient. Think out of the box in terms of cloud. The cloud hasn't been there's no buy-in yet on Wall Street when you talk cloud. Private cloud, yes, but when you're going to a public cloud or even a hybrid cloud, it's still kind of a tough sell. Not having that ownership of information. But yeah, budgets and costs, CapEx and OpEx that's a number one on a CIO's list. We get faced with that on a daily basis.
And you got to balance it.
Absolutely.
But I would argue that when you look at what's driving cloud deployments and what's really happening from that perspective, it's that app developer that's not in the CIO organization sitting outside that's really driving that test dev cloud environment, because they can get to it quicker, they can put something out on the public cloud versus waiting. So how do companies address that and get that, to your point, the business and the IT organizations working together? Because we all hear that. The CIO organization has to be at the table with the business people. But how do you pull in that rogue developer and make your environment more agile so you can deploy much quicker?
I think from having been a programmer in the past, it is nice to be able to get development. The cloud guys that have really taken off have done it for two different reasons, all right? So you take like Salesforce.com. That's a cloud application. A lot of people use it, but it was sold as an application already in the cloud, already tested, already happy. You get to other environments and it's more a balance of what you're doing with your capacity. So when you have leftover capacity, you can use it for something else. So NASCAR is a good example. They're one of the first cloud guys out there that really did it, because you can buy a stream and you sit in a NASCAR and you watch the race. But if your driver wrecks, you got nowhere to go, right? You got to go to another car. So being able to balance that, or like Amazon, you know, they've got tons around the holidays. They have to build up all this capacity, and the ISPs don't give them 3-month contracts. So they sell all that out, you know, the rest of the year and allow other people to use it. So it really is understanding what those capacity models are and where you can gain those efficiencies from it. And it has been a real slow adoption, but I think a lot of it, you know, back to your point, is there's been a lot of marketing hype and a lot of junk, and it's really hard to get through some of that and get to the facts and figure out what that's going to do for your business.
Well, Salesforce came about before the term cloud.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
It's a hosted application.
Exactly. And it's not new technology.
It's
It's
not.
basically making other machines act like a mainframe. You know?
Absolutely.
Okay, I think we have a few more minutes left. Any other questions, comments? Well, let's touch on that one last subject, which is near and dear to my heart. I think, Kerry, you touched on it, you know, somewhat. Network. As we think about data center, clearly there are applications that are network-centric. I would argue just about all of them. So we talk about, you know, the latency requirements. We talk about the move to Ethernet. What's happening out there, and what again, inside the data center to outside the data center? I think Kerry touched on some of them. What are other perspectives as you think about network topology inside to the data center and coming into the data center?
Well, convergence,
Good one.
fiber, you know, storage and Ethernet. You know, that's becoming a trend. That's become something that's prevalent. Consolidation, you mentioned consolidation, layer 2 and layer 3 being consolidated and flattened. We've seen a lot of that.
Especially,
Right.
I think the biggest thing that's changing from a networking and hardware perspective is the competition in the space.
Sure.
You know, every electronics guy out there wants to be your end-all, be-all, everything, and I've yet to find a company that can do that, because a lot of it's being driven by external application vendors and, you know, what runs on what platform and that kind of stuff. But I think the biggest shift is the competition in that market.
Who has
It's
the
got
fastest switch?
fierce,
Yeah, the lowest latency.
fierce. Best
Right,
price,
best price, lowest
lowest
latency.
maintenance cost. When you put it down to all of that stuff, you know, the highest.
So are we seeing new vendors, or is it same old with just?
Well, there's a lot of new vendors in the switching space. You're seeing some interesting things happening. Would you like to mention vendors here?
You can mention vendors.
Velo Systems is coming up with a low latency switch. Juniper obviously has been around. They're just, you know, beating Cisco to pulp.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think the other shift too is you're seeing traditional switch vendors now offering servers. Because again, it's that whole, I want to be everything you have in your data center, and
Unified communications.
exactly.
You must be referring to Cisco then.
Well, you know, I mean, look at Cisco. You got IBM, you know, working with Juniper. You've got HP that just bought 3Com. You've got, you know, there's a lot of that happening in that space, and it's gotten fiercely competitive. And I think companies are going to have to change the metrics of the way they buy that stuff. It's not just going to be price. It's going to be performance to price to ongoing maintenance cost to power. There's going to be, I think, a more cohesive metric for those decisions.